moving on to the relationship between real world sex work and gaming. The biggest new kid on the block is obviously the OnlyFans website. It's got as of August 2021, it's got 2 million content creators and 130 million users. It's an internet content subscription site technically, but it is primarily used by sex workers producing pornography. I'm going to run us to so the current state of play with porn, as I'm the core demographic of it, as most of it is aimed at men, even though more and more people are able to enjoy it now as it becomes more mainstream. Porn is, I think, because it's seizing the means of production, which means individuals who want to do any kind of digital sex work, they have far more agency now. Because in the past, like 20 years ago, we have done this show. To do this show, we would have had to get a radio show with an established broadcaster. But now anyone with a camera and a microphone can do it. And the same holds true for porn. And anything that provides greater agency in any field is always going to be better, because it means that it's easier to not be exploited, or it's harder for someone to be exploited while they're doing any kind of work. So where it is now is good compared to where it has been in the past. So in order to, I'm going to give us we're going to go on a jolly romp through the last 100 years of pornography. So about 100 years ago, when 150 years ago, the advent of cameras, they were having boudoir shots and very tasteful. And then when video came along, they started doing a bit of that. But then once the 1960s came along, there were two brothers called Jim and Artie Mitchell. And they had the bright idea of there were burlesque clubs everywhere. And burlesque is basically a raunchy dancing wearing lingerie, not nude. And they saw that and thought, I wonder what it'd be like if she took her top off. And wouldn't you know, that club had profound success, and then topless dancing spread everywhere. And then it became full nudity, then just escalating and escalating and escalating. And to 21st century, like, it's just grown and grown and grown. And one of the questions later on is going to be about what this says about men and clients who purchase anything related, and why it has been escalating out of control and continues to, even though the conditions, the potential positive conditions, are improving. So that's my take on the current state of digital sex work. Do either of you have any thoughts on that?
I can chip in on the history of sex work and porn and stuff. I was listening to a podcast the other day. Actually, it was a mashup of The History Fix and My Dad Wrote a Porno, and basically it was the My Dad Wrote a Porno team talking to Dan Snow about the history of sex, and they explored the Victorian era, which was really interesting in and of itself, because obviously that back then sex was massively taboo, but everyone was a little bit obsessed with it. So they had to find like it was kind of like readily available on the street, in the shop windows, that kind of thing. And they talked about like how they were doing photography, but they had to use the same studios as they just used for family portraits. So there'd be all these pictures of naked people in like quaint scenes of like family households and stuff, because they used the same studios. All sorts of things, but they weren't like obviously not photoshopped in any way. They weren't like buffered and bronzed. They were just naturally human people showing all their wrinkles and all sorts of different things. It was just very like, this person's got his chest out. It's a man with a hairy chest. Look, that kind of thing. So it was very sort of interesting in the way that it shaped just how we view ourselves as humans, and like, I guess what's taboo in different time periods and things like that. It was just very interesting. But yeah, it's definitely changed a lot with the advent of digital platforms and digital porn, and the agency, like you say, how it's in the hands of the person that wants to create it now, rather than distributed from like one particular individual or more. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add, really. Just that I heard an interesting podcast the other day about it. So yeah,
I think it's like all of these things. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because if you, the great thing about new technologies and the internet is that it enables people. It sets the barrier bars very low to be able to get out there and do this stuff and to monetize and to reach an audience, and it sort of cuts out the middle-man generally, and so that puts the power in the hands of the creators. However, I think that also when you have a situation like this where it's so scattered, that it makes it very hard to legislate. It makes it very hard to protect people from abuse and from abusive systems. So I feel like it is a double-edged sword, because I think that sometimes it's like all of these things, isn't it? How do you know where the line is drawn between somebody making a choice, a conscious choice to do something that is not harming them, versus somebody being in a position where they feel like that choice doesn't really exist for them? If you can make more money. Oh my gosh, you see me?
Oh, yes, you're just slightly frozen.
Oh gosh,
it's all good.
Okay.
No, we can hear you still. So
okay, so yeah, if you can make more money through sex work for less hours and all of that, and you do, is that okay, or is it not okay? How does anyone know? How can we possibly how can we say either way? How can they say either way? I think it's like all these things, like if everyone around you is doing something, then it might feel normal and okay, but is it normal and okay, and is it safe, and is it secure, and are you all right with that? And I think that's the problem that society has when it comes to sex work. And I think the problem with a site like OnlyFans is that it opens up those opportunities to all sorts of people, and there's no way to know how safe those people are. I think I need to restart, I'm afraid, because I think my graphics card has died.
Oh,
I'll see if I can
dear.
talk until you reappear.
Yeah, I will be back.
I think
Mm.
that it's the point about comes down to your agency to consent to something, because
Yes.
yes, OnlyFans is a way that you can say, I can make money doing sex work, and I can do it from home. I can do it. A lot of them, they can do it anonymously. A lot of some of the most popular, successful porn, they're called verified amateurs,
Mm.
are anonymous. They don't do it. They don't show their face, and
Yeah.
so that's possible. So it's got this entire avenue, which is a billion times safer than anything physical,
Mm.
and so that seems like a really good. You go, oh, that sounds like a really good prospect. So I was thinking, I, 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 I would do it. I wouldn't not do it. It's something
Mm.
that uh, I, I have no problem with anyone doing it, and so yeah, that's where it is for me. So I think, oh, it's neutral. I don't need to do it. I could do it. There could be money there. It could be another source of income. Just think of another form of work. But when we take into account the system,
Mm.
and we live under capitalism and patriarchy, and they that is the system under which we can consent, but only to a point. We work, even if you love your job, you work because you have to work.
Mm.
And the more extreme um, capitalism becomes, the more the greater the wealth gap. For people working 40 hours a week on a minimum wage um, with no like skills that will get them to a high paying secure job, there's the
Mm.
opportunity. You can just say to them, oh, why don't you just take your clothes off on OnlyFans and you make loads of money? And that sounds really, really good and really enticing. But the problem is the system that says you can use sex, you can either be yourself and try things the conventional way, or you can just take your clothes off
Mm.
and 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 do that. So it's
Yeah, it's bringing up a lot of interesting thoughts, really. I was thinking there are some parallels with our episode that we did on sexual abuse and sexual violence in gaming spaces and online spaces, and how we keep those spaces safe and like moderate them, whether we need to moderate those spaces as well. And I think a lot of these things are relatively quite new, and I'm not sure, I don't know whether it's governing bodies or the websites themselves or just society as a whole. I don't think we, quote unquote, have got to grips with how to keep these spaces safe, whether we can keep up with what's happening online and how it's evolving, um, to even begin to put in place safety measures and things like that. Not to dampen down the subject, but I know that I think we discussed the online safety bill possibly coming in fairly soon, and that's been delayed, I believe. So again, there are inherent risks to obviously putting yourself out there online in any form, but particularly I think with sex work, it's something that we can't not talk about. And it's something that we should acknowledge as well, that there's this darker side to it. and that there are risks and dangers involved. But there's also the side to it where if we shut it down completely and say, oh no, it's not allowed, then that's just going to breed even more unsafe environments for it to continue in, if that makes sense. I don't know if it does, but
yeah, it does, and it comes back to the point we made at the start, in that none of us, apart from you, Alex, know one person who has been in the industry, never been in it ourselves. We're not the ones who should be making legislation about it. No one has any business, apart from sex workers, working out what they need, what they want, and then in theory, government is supposed to deliver that for them. And sites like the what's it called? The English Collective of Prostitutes. You can Google any kind of site like that if you want to find out what policy and legislative positions sex workers are choosing. Bit of fun now, a little bit lighter. We're going to move on to the intersection between how games are being used by sex workers for sexual things that the game is not in any way intended to. I think you're going to enjoy in particular one of these, Jem.
I'm a bit scared now.
So we're going to start off by going through some examples of how non-sexual games are being used for sexual purposes, and I want you to be thinking all the while through, what about men? What does this say about men? Because I am very... It's just like when we were talking about the idea of the alpha male.
yes.
I've been ingrained. That's been like propaganded into young men like me to thinking it's normal, and I just said, "Oh, he sounds like a bit of a dick." So, I'm too in deep. So I want to know what you two think about, what the fuck does this say about men? As we go through this. So there are people called financial dominatrixes, and there's one named Kiara, and her clients get sexual pleasure by giving this woman control over their finances, that being dominated in a financial way. And for most, before the pandemic, again, another thing, working from home, it applied just as much to sex work as to every other job. She said she made most of her earnings through in-person meetings. Like she would walk up to the agree meeting place. She'd walk up, say, "Give me your wallet," take the money out, and then walk off. And that would give the man sexual pleasure. And hey, it's not hurting anyone. Each to their own. So there is that element to it. There's always the, hey, if it's between consenting adults and it doesn't hurt anyone. And again, Alex and I were talking about the how much agency do you have in terms of giving your consent in this society? Like people say, "Oh, women, why don't you just say no to sex? That can get women killed." So how much agency can you have? But now, Jem, she spends a lot of time on Animal Crossing.
Hey!
And I don't think you and Caroline talked about this on your episode, but the subs can pay to go to Kiara's virtual island and carry out chores for them.
Oh gosh, I might have to set up a.
I
Wow.
know, right?
Because
You
my
think of
island
those-
is really
She's onto
abandoned at the
something
moment.
there. She's onto something there.
Yeah, it's just genius. It's just one of those things where, why the hell
But
not?
is this it? Well, I mean, I'm not. I obviously don't know. They're saying that they're getting sexual gratification from this, but you know, is it sex work if there's no sex involved? You know, I mean, if you're just doing something that is there more?
Stand by. We're 2 sentences away.
Okay.
And yeah, in Minecraft, you can people pay to shower them with diamonds and carry out grinding, in quotation marks, grinding tasks such as collecting resources. And
Yes.
I don't know if you realise you can do this, but on Animal Crossing, you can spank someone with a butterfly net.
No.
Yeah, you can.
And it says there's an in-game wheel,
Yeah.
you know, about that, and they use that to determine whether the client should pay a fee or orgasm.
Oh. Wow.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's the intersection, so to speak. So that in terms of my like porn literacy, that is not particularly extreme. It's what's the word? Bespoke.
Yes.
Hey, again, assuming I could be completely wrong, that you aren't as versed in the porn universe as I am. So, what's your Jeb? We had a little bit of your reaction. What what is this?
Well, I mean, I think there's all sorts of things, isn't there? I mean, people have fetishes, all sorts of
Yeah.
fetishes,
Loads.
and you know, she's obviously she's got that niche.
Yes. Definitely a niche market.
and she's exploiting it, and more power to her for that. You know, I mean, I think this sort of scenario, I think, is the sort of positive end of the OnlyFans
Definitely.
world. I think,
Yeah.
because you've got, you know, it sounds like relatively safe, as safe as these things ever are, set up, and you know, there's no direct contact necessarily between the real peoples, and so I think, you know, that this is a sort of scenario that I'm uncomfortable with. I think it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, like I said, you know, where do you draw the line? Where does it become sex work? You know, because people can get off on, like I said, all sorts of things, and some of the time you don't know that that's what people are getting off on, and I don't know. I don't know about, like, I mean, I know you did a definition at the start, and I'm not sure whether this would actually fall into that, because if she's distanced from any of that side of things, then, you know, how impactful is it on her?
Although there's also, like, if you're thinking about, I don't know, and obviously sex isn't just physical. There's things like phone sex and all sorts of other sex. But would that fall under that kind of sex then? Or am I just, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got like sexting, haven't you,
Yeah.
and textual sex, and you
Yeah.
know, I mean, that happened a lot in back in the mudding world. You know, there was a lot of descriptive sex going on in various places and ways, and some of it was at times coded into the games.
Mm.
So there were sort of sex scenes and things that would happen in certain games, and some of it just went on between individuals, and so I think, you know, any environment like that, you're going to get that kind of thing. I think this is quite I think using a game environment actually is a really interesting
Yeah.
setup. And I think, once we get into, don't know if either of you have started are watching Divergent. Is it Divergent? Yeah.
You mean the film series?
The TV series.
Oh, I haven't seen the TV series. I've seen the film. But
Yeah.
it might be a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Based on William Gibson book. But it's set in the future where you've got this sort of Ready Player One style world where people are like living in games and getting paid for stuff they carry out in games. There's a lot more to it than that, but yeah, I mean, once we move into that kind of thing, and you're wearing sort of haptic feedback suits and all of that, which I know they've already started doing things like that. Like you can get a little like a little thing that you can press to say that you're up for it tonight, and your partner can press, and that's like even in the same house, so you don't have to have a conversation about it where one of you might be rejected. You just press the button and say, I'm available if you are. And so I think using technology is expanding the opportunities a lot. And I'm not surprised that games are being utilised in that way at all.
It's so interesting to think about. Yeah.
We're talking about the social environment in which women, the majority of women engaging in sex work, are doing it to pay the bills. So the question becomes, rather than something, it's just something that dirty women do and it's a shameful thing, rather than it's just work supporting people. It comes down to what a person is willing to do to pay their bills. And so you can't judge anyone for that, and you shouldn't. So those are the social forces that compel the majority of people into sex work. But there was a survey of, no one ever talks about the clients of sex workers. It's like their only conversations ever had is about the sex workers themselves, never about why men do it. And there was an Australian study of 600 men were surveyed. What percentage do you think had paid for sex at least once?
In Australia?
Yeah.
Most of them, I would say.
Yeah, probably like 75, 80, maybe. Am I going too high? I'm too optimistic. No, pessimistic.
You have no faith.
I think 99%.
Chuck some numbers out.
24%.
Okay.
But still, you think a quarter. So obviously, it's the last 100 years of escalation prove that the demand for all kinds of sex work and diversifying forms of it and escalating forms of it is only growing. And no one talks about why that is. And in this survey, they asked why. And it was, number one, satisfy sexual needs. Paying for sex is less trouble than having a relationship. And third was it's entertaining. So I think that alongside the patriarchy, the pressure that the patriarchy puts on women and the patriarchy puts on men are different, but they're still on the male side of things, the client side. It's driving us into the simpler world of sex work and porn and online stuff like that, rather than going, okay, we're going to, like an addict, we're going to wean you off the unreal stuff so that you can grow into relationship stuff. But I think the reason why it escalates and escalates and escalates is because they're just digging deeper and deeper and deeper into that side of things. What do you guys think about what this phenomenon is for men?
Well, firstly, I have to say that it wasn't Divergent; it's The Peripheral.
Okay,
The name
yeah.
of the series.
Well,
I
I've
don't want
seen
to confuse
I've seen
everyone.
trailer for
Sorry,
it. No, I
I'm
shall definitely start
so
watching it
bad at
though.
names
But
of
yeah.
things. I'm gonna come back to me because I'm
No
gonna
worries.
pop.
No, it's fine. I thought obviously the percentage is less than we thought, which was interesting. Yeah, it's difficult really to kind of quantify because, like you say, it's not really the center of everyone's focus, is it? Everyone's thinking about the sex worker rather than the client. And I think it's important to remember the patriarchy does put pressure on men as well as women. And I think that was a good point to raise, Matt, because obviously that manifests itself in toxic masculinity and, being an alpha male and what that means and being sexually active and that kind of thing as well. And that might translate into someone paying for sex because it might be the only way they feel they can get sex or something. I don't know where I'm going with my point, but yeah, it's interesting to think about how those pressures kind of show themselves in men.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Both what you've both said actually, and I had sort of thoughts coming up and then shifting as you were both talking. So, which is one of the things that I love about these conversations. I think that it is really it's really problematic, this myth that we have that men have to have sex, that they can't live without sex, and therefore it's not their fault, it's their right, their right
Yeah.
to access sex. So if they can't find somebody who wants to have sex with them, it is their right to go and pay for it. And even though we live in a world largely in the West where prostitution and sex work is illegal in varying forms, we still have a huge industry that is exists based on sex work. And I remember just a few years ago there was figures coming out that were basically saying that sex work was propping up the British economy because of the massive amount of income that comes as a result of it. And and yet we have this sort of prudish attitude to it that, like, oh, it's so bad, and only strange people do that. And that's, as Matt has explained, that is not the truth. It's not only strange people who are sex workers, and it's not only strange people who visit and utilize sex workers. And I shouldn't even use the term utilize because that's inappropriate as well. But it is a normalized thing in us that we react to as though this is an abnormal thing. And because of our attitudes to it, because of this conflict, I think it really does everyone a disservice, because men are not, do not have to have sex. They're not entitled to sex. No one is entitled to sex. But also, women are not only there to have sex with men when men want to have sex. Women are also allowed to enjoy and want and seek out sex. And yet we live in this society that sort of has this idea that men want sex and women don't, you know, and I think this is extremely bad for everyone. I mean, we always talk about how the patriarchy and these in-ground situations are bad, but I think this is really problematic. And I think, you know, when you add it in with all the toxic masculinity, it's this, you know, and I hope that one of the positive things that comes through from having places like OnlyFans, which has reduced it so it's allowing, you know, normal people in their homes to access this industry, I hope that maybe it might unlock, you know, sexuality for people who have felt that it was something that wasn't for them, you know, because, yeah, I hope that if it has one positive thing, I would hope that it's that it does actually genuinely empower women to, you know, engage with their sexuality, or, you know, and non-binary, you know, people who are not very sure about where they sit on that scale. So I feel that there is opportunity there, and that perhaps our focus shouldn't always be on the men or on the worker. You know, maybe it should be on the wider issue.
Yeah, it's the same for a lot of disabled people as well. Having the world of sex work online has definitely opened things up for a lot of disabled people as well. Or at least that's what I've come across in my work, and on the forum that I help manage. Because we have a section on sex and relationships, so that tends to come up quite a lot about online dating in general mostly. But there's definitely been conversations around it which are always interesting to manage. Different people have very different opinions, so it's always fun to try and weigh in on those. But yeah, it's such an interesting thing to discuss. So definitely.
Yeah, it really feels like conversations like this are the way forward for everyone. Because before thinking about this, it's so stigmatized and so taboo. You can't just think about it as it's just a normal thing that people do. And as with everything in a society, it needs to be thought through. The people involved need to be supported in arriving at policy and legislative positions that they like, that give them agency and safety and support. And that can't happen unless we're just talking about it and talking about it and talking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's enough. I think we've done enough for today.
For now.
Positive note to finish on.
Yeah.
I think men have come a long way from masturbating in cinemas, which has went on for decades and decades and decades. So OnlyFans, whatever today is, it is better than that. So that's thank you everyone so much for watching and listening as we explore this very interesting topic. You can find us releasing something every Thursday at 7 p.m. As always, if you're watching us, like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening to us, give us a comment and give us 5 stars on whenever you're listening to, because we want to get as much feminist gaming content into the eyes and ears of as many people as possible. So until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.